You're moving with your family coming home, Dad. It's pretty hot that day, though, isn't it? Oh, okay.
And last Sunday, they were saying,
How big is the tree?
the history of that.
You haven't seen it? Oh, it's all terrific here. I didn't see it from inside the house.
I didn't bring my pencil though. There's pens back there in the cup if you want one. What's your board? I already did it. So this is just control. Yeah. So I've got the. We're live right now.
Two actually.
One time we had Southern Skates, they're down 16. Yeah, it's I was surprised by Strass and the tree that picked up to pretty good size. They just got the whole thing. We have a guy that crane lift them up into the strap around the top of the tree, and then he was shooting on down, and then he took the chainsaw and just cut it at the bottom and crane it. And one more thing that
How many weeks is this? If you look at the back, you'll see the first section. Those are going to be the topics we're going to cover. So it'll be, what is that, 2, 4, 6, 7 after this one. It's a total of 8. 8 weeks. Current plan.
Early every Sunday now.
What?
We gotta get up earlier now.
It's a good and pleasant
She likes
thing.
sleeping in on Sunday morning.
You know, it's all relative, right? You know, when our kids were little, sleeping in was, you know, sleep until 7:15. So.
Right, that's true.
Well, my question was, why wouldn't you want to get up to the Lord, right?
Exactly. On your handouts and on the screen, there's a little place you can open up your camera. We're going to start out today by taking a couple of surveys about the state of Christianity in the world. The first one is actually, if you have a handout, there's a QR code on there. You can scan it, or you can do it by text. You can do it by URL. The first poll is just going to be make sure everybody's getting connected. You can put in what your favorite football team is. Favorite football team. So if it asks for your name, you'll hit skip. You don't have to sign up for anything. But you're just going to use the QR code that's on the page there, or any of those options. We're going to get connected and make sure you're able to do this one, so we can do the ones that matter. Who else needs more sheets? If you don't have a phone, you can just think in your head. And we'll watch the responses come in here, see if anybody's connecting. George has got a solid lead. Looks like we're getting the hang of it. Is anybody having trouble connecting that wants help? No? We're good? All right, we'll go to the poll that matters then. Let's see here. Same place when it should, oops, go back, sorry. On your phone, it should refresh in a couple of seconds. And it's going to be the stat of we live in an increasingly post-Christian society, an age of skepticism. What does that mean for Christians meant to serve as salt and light for the world? Let's start by understanding the state of Christianity today. So, people are already responding, so it must be working. I'll present it again. We'll put 42 surveys are underway. There's only 4 questions, so I won't keep you here all day. Oh, yes. The dumpster down. Yeah.
I don't know if there's something.
Yeah, there's something called here. Yeah.
We have a church in here.
We could, yeah.
It's a big one today.
Got a couple more surveys coming in. They're bringing me a microphone. So if you can't hear me in the back, the microphone's coming. Okay, let's take a look at the results of our survey of where we think Christianity is at in the world today. The first question was faith versus atheism. Is religious faith growing faster, or is atheism growing faster? We resoundingly said atheism is growing faster. Interestingly enough, there are fewer atheists in the world today, 147 million, than in 1970. When there were 165 million. The number is expected to continue to decline.
Pastor,
Yes, please.
the answer that was given by this class would be appropriate for the United States,
Correct.
but not for the world.
That's correct. That's why we're talking about the state of Christianity in the world today. All right? Let's see how else we did. Is Christianity growing, shrinking, or staying the same in population? Again, worldwide. We solidly said shrinking. See what happens in reality. Christianity, specifically, is growing. A growth rate of 1.17%. Almost 2.56 billion people will identify as Christian by the middle of 2022. By 2050, that number is expected to top 3.3 billion. This might be a little different than our perceptions. Take a look at another one. Where is Christianity growing the fastest? You guys said Africa and Asia. Those are very good answers. In fact, very specifically, the fastest growing place is in Africa. Christianity is growing faster than any other continent. If you think about it, in 1900, twice as many Christians lived in Europe than in the rest of the world combined. Today, more Christians live in Africa than on any other continent, and by 2050, Africa will be home to almost 1.3 billion Christians. This is hard for us to fathom a little bit. Not just talking about Christians. Do you know how many Lutherans there are in Madagascar, that island off of Africa? 4 million. Wow. You know how many Lutherans are in America? 4 million. Okay. You know how many Lutherans there are in Tanzania? 8 million. There's twice as many Lutherans in Tanzania, however, it depends where you're from and how you say it, than there are, double the amount than there are in the Americas, or in North America, I should say. The global South is the place where Christianity is growing and exploding right now.
I'm packing.
You're packing, that's right, exactly. We've got some great churches to send you to there. We just, in fact, just at Synod Convention 2 weeks ago, our Board for World Missions, with whom I work, we just received into fellowship another Lutheran church in Africa from Uganda, the Obadiah Lutheran Synod. Exciting stuff. All right. What percentage of Christians live in a majority Christian country? In other words, I live in a country where most of it is Christian. Here you guys chose 50%, 38%, and second place would be 25%. Interestingly, in 1900, 100 years ago, 95% of all Christians lived in a majority Christian country. In 22, that number's fallen to 53%, so good job, you got that. By 2050, most Christians, 50.4% around the world, will live in non-majority Christian nations. What are the implications of that? What's the difference between 95% of Christians living in a majority country, like in 1900, and 50% not? Kayla?
I think it's just more that they're spread out. So rather than all being together in one place, you have a lot. They're just spread.
Yeah, okay, and they are spread out, yeah? Joanne?
The thing that comes to my mind is, how then do we live amongst these non-Christians?
Well, isn't that interesting? When I first came to Georgia and started doing outreach, I would talk to people, and now Coweta County, Georgia is a very church state, and Coweta County is a very churched county and a very church state. We're in the middle of the Bible Belt. And I talked to some people early on, and they weren't sure evangelism should be a priority because everybody that they knew was a Christian. Everybody went to church. And now, going out and knocking on doors made me realize that their perception wasn't accurate. If everybody went to church in Coweta County, we wouldn't have enough room in the churches to seat them on a Sunday morning, right? Turns out, when I started this work, 1 out of every 2 doors I knocked on in the county had someone who wasn't actively going to church on a Sunday. That doesn't mean they weren't Christian, but they weren't actively going to a church. If you live in a non-majority country, if Christianity, as Kayla said, is spread out across the world far more, and then Joanne's question of what does that mean about the way in which we live, what are the implications about outreach from that reality? What do you think?
We have work to do in our own community.
Okay, we have your neighbors, the kids that are playing on the soccer team with your children, the people that probably live next door. More and more so, you're going to be able to assume that they're going to be from a non-Christian background, and maybe for your neighborhoods, rather a post-Christian background. What's the difference between non-Christian and post-Christian? What do you think, Debbie?
Part of it may be the post-Christian. One or the other is, one has heard or been around or at least heard about the gospel and has rejected it. But now there's so many more that haven't even heard the gospel.
Yeah, I think Debbie got that right. So a non-Christian, or someone might be someone who heard the gospel, rejected it, I want nothing to do with it. That's a very different thing than a lot of people who grow up in a post-Christian society. So post-Christian means 50 years ago, if you were a polite member of society, you were expected to be a member of a church, be a Christian, and go to church on Sunday if you were a polite member of society. We are increasingly becoming post-Christian, where that's not something that's assumed by society. And think about what that means then. We've got a whole generation of people that are coming of age right now who were never raised inside of a church and whose parents were only nominally raised inside of a church. That is most definitely a post-Christian generation that's coming up. But here's the great opportunity there. This is not a generation that has heard the gospel and rejected it. This is a generation that thinks they know what Christianity is, but honestly all they've ever gotten is a caricature. They've never gotten to see true, authentic Christianity. But now this says that they're going to get a chance to see what true, authentic Christianity looks like. You know how they're going to see that?
From us.
You. Yeah, you. And so sometimes when we wring our hands about the decline of Christianity in America, as Bob was saying, so these statistics that we've been looking at talk about Christianity in the world. You could look at Christianity in America, it's moving towards post-Christian society. In one sense, we can look at that as an obligation and an opportunity for the Holy Christian Church. There's a whole generation of young people that just have a caricature of Christianity. What are we going to do to reach them with the message of authentic Christianity? We live, as Dr. Keller says, in an age of skepticism. And what we're going to do is take a look at what does it mean to believe in an age of skepticism. Dr. Tim Keller grew up as a Lutheran, became a very conservative Presbyterian, a PCA member, Presbyterian Church in America pastor, and he went to Manhattan, 30 years ago, something like that, to start a new church in one of the most post-Christian parts of the country, one of the most secular parts of the country in Manhattan. And the last time I checked, I think that church is over 5,000 members and has spawned 20 or 30 different other congregations. And I think what this book does is it takes Dr. Keller's approach to working with people that are going to come from a non-Christian background, a secular background, and having the idea of say, well, let's take a look at the doubts each of us might have about our belief systems, and then look for answers that might indicate whether or not I've placed my doubts or my faith in the right place or the wrong place. And so we're going to take a look at this book. Not everything in it is gospel truth, but we want to take a look at some of the things that maybe we can learn from it. And today we're going to take a look at on the sheet here. And let's start out with number 2, examining the problem. Here's a quote from his introduction. There's a great gulf today between what is popularly known as liberalism and conservatism. Each side demands that you not only disagree with, but disdain others at best, or crazy, or at worst, evil. This is particularly true when religion is the point at issue. Progressives cry out that fundamentalism is growing rapidly, and non-belief is stigmatized. They point out that politics has turned toward the right, supported by megachurches and mobilized Orthodox believers. Conservatives, on the other hand, endlessly denounce what they see as an increasingly skeptical and relativistic society. Major universities, media companies, and elite institutions are heavily secular, they say, and they control the culture. So which is it? Is skepticism or faith on the ascendancy in the world today? How about the first one? Do you agree with that summary? What parts of it resonate with you? How has it impacted you? Which parts do you feel are unfair or untrue? What do you think?
It resonates with me. It feels like we're increasingly polarized in our...
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
And they're listening.
I took off my Apple Watch so it wouldn't do that, but the Mac is listening too. I'll have to turn that off. So are you saying an increasingly polarized?
It feels like we're living in an increasingly polarized society.
Definitely. Increased polarization in society. Anybody else?
Yeah, you've got people that, I think you put it best, you're supposed to look with disdain at the opposite side.
How about that? Yeah, I think that I could see that in society, that it's not just disagreement anymore, it's disdain.
And it's not even about just religion, it's everything.
Yeah.
Politics, everything.
Yep.
Division.
If you don't have the same view I do, you're wrong, I'm right.
Okay, yeah. What are the implications of that, of this polarization that we look with, or that we're being encouraged to look with disdain rather than understanding a different point of view? What implications are that?
Well, it just ends the conversation.
Okay, yeah.
Rather than having to talk to them about what you
I think it does end the conversation. Now think about what that means then. What does that mean for the church, the Holy Christian Church, you and me as Christians, our ability to talk with people who are unbelievers? What impacts does that have?
There's no reasonable ground for discussion.
discussion.
Okay, there's no reasonable ground for discussion, exactly. I think that's really important. And all of a sudden, and his point is it's not just that secularists don't want to have a place to discuss with a believer. He's making the point that also believers can't find a middle ground with skeptics. Right? Now that's an interesting thing, because of course part of us are like, what middle ground am I going to have with a skeptic? Right? What middle ground am I going to have with an unbeliever? Well, I guess I'd suggest that the first middle ground we find with skeptics and with an unbeliever is the love that Jesus has for that person. Right? We're going to hear in Vicar's sermon this morning about this Canaanite woman that came up to Jesus, and that you talk about how surprising it was. Here's a woman who's a Canaanite from Tyre and Sidon, which is the place where like wicked Queen Jezebel came from. If you were going to look for somebody who belonged in the Holy Christian Church, this was not the place to look. But this woman comes up, and she had been reached by the gospel. Right? She had already found that middle ground. And when you hear his sermon this morning, just think about this beautiful thought that she comes up and says, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me." And she's confessing the absolute truth about Israel's Messiah. This is David's son who had come to save Israel. And Jesus tests her, right? Says, "I've only come for the lost sheep of Israel." And then he says, you can't take the children's bread and give it to their pet dogs. Now you might think that would have offended her, but Jesus was testing her. Do you really believe in the Messiah that God had promised? The Messiah that the Old Testament prophesied that Messiah would come and save Israel. And then through Israel, Gentiles would believe too. And she has this amazing words where she says, when Messiah comes, when he feeds us, Messiah brings such abundance that there's more than enough food for the children. There's even enough food for their pet dogs. And the whole point that Jesus was trying to show his disciples is that we have to be ready to understand that church is for all people. For you and me, that might not be a Sarah or a Tyre and Sidon Canaanite woman. For you and me, it might be that skeptic, that unbeliever, that post-Christian person with whom you work, who lives in your neighborhood, or with whom you go to school. And I think the suggestion that Dr. Keller is going to give us here is that we find a common ground and we short-circuit this divisive or polarizing sort of bent that's taken over our current culture. And instead, how is it that you and I can find common ground with people that don't share the same beliefs as we do? Right? Take a look at the second page. It's interesting that when we ask the first question, is Christianity or skepticism, is Christianity or secularism on the rise today? The answer that Dr. Keller gives as an introduction to his book is, the answer is yes to both. They're both on the rise because our society and the world is getting more religious and less religious at the same time. Right? So that's a really important distinction that he makes, because he says, maybe we should stop talking like that first paragraph says. Have you heard of people talk about Christianity, that it's shrinking so much that, God help us, if the end doesn't come soon, Christianity is going to be wiped off from the earth? Things like that. I've heard people talk like that. When in fact, Christianity is going to increase by 500 million people in the next couple of decades. It just might be that that's not going to happen here. Right? Might not happen here. This is not a new thing. Martin Luther used to talk about that the gospel is like a little rain cloud that waters the earth and moves on. Think about the great centers of Christianity over history. First, Christianity was centered in Israel. The love of many grew cold, and that gospel rain shower went to Asia Minor. Turkey today. Turkey was a great center of Christianity for a long time. Then the love of many grew cold, and that moved to Europe. And Europe was the center of Christianity for a couple of centuries. The love of many grew cold, and now those great cathedrals are just museums on Sunday morning. And the gospel moved to North America. The gospel was here, and the church grew tremendously. Is the love of many growing cold? Might that rain cloud of the gospel be moving to someplace else like Africa? Yeah, it's possible. It certainly is possible. So, but keep in mind this. Jesus' church, he has promised that not even the gates of hell will overcome it. So the church is not going anywhere. So we don't have to worry that if we seek common ground with skeptics, that somehow the church is going to lose. Because the church is only here to do one thing, which is to gather the elect into Christ's fold before he comes again. That's it. Let's take a look at the top of that page 2. 3 generations ago, most people inherited rather than chose their faith. What happened? What's the status today? What are the implications? You think that's true? 3 generations ago, most people inherited their faith? What does that mean? Somebody define that for me. Okay.
It was through your parents.
Okay. Yeah, your parents took you to church, your parents taught you about Jesus, your parents said your prayers with you, and then you became a Christian because your parents were Christian. Yeah. What's happened? What do you think?
Culture's kind of gone the opposite way, like not encouraging going to church, and I feel like a couple generations ago, like we said, it was not the most Christian. Everyone was going to church.
Yeah, please, Debbie. And
I
then
think a lot of it is the bond between parent and child is not as secure as it used to be.
bond, not as secure. What do you think?
More parents are wanting to let their children choose.
Yeah, I agree with you, Debbie, but I see it through a different lens. I think parents have elevated junior to the top of every totem pole, right? So it used to be to care for your children might mean you have to tell them no once in a while, right? Or you might have to tell them that their schedule isn't what dictates the family schedule. And now all of us, self-indicting, when you want to do something, your kids are a certain age. I mean, I remember several years where it felt like all I was doing was driving to activities, events, whatever else, because you want to do for your kids, but there becomes a problem when that changes into, we all know how this goes, but when sports or dance or whatever else become more important than corporate worship together, there's an effect. What happened for a lot of people was their grandparents were churchgoers, their parents were nominally Christian, but they raised their children on the sports field on Sunday morning, and so their children never ever really became Christian at all. That's Generation Z. Generation Z and younger millennials that I work with, these are people that are very much, I think their grandparents would be surprised that they're not Christian. Because their grandparents lived at the time where everybody's Christian. We don't have to do outreach. Everybody knows Christian. Not your grandkids, right? There are some big implications about that. And I think big implications for us as we raise our children past the age where they can inherit a faith from us, right? At some point, your father's faith has to become your faith, right? So exactly the time at which we tend to start being more hands-off with our children, maybe when they're in their teens, later teens, early 20s, that's the time when people need even more mentoring, counseling, encouragement from parents. You never stop being a parent. You might stop changing diapers, but you never stop being a parent. Yeah. How about this? Evaluate this statement. The culture wars are taking a toll. Emotions and rhetoric are intense, even hysterical. Those who believe in God and Christianity are out to impose their beliefs on the rest of us and turn back the clock to a less enlightened time. Those who don't believe the Christian message are enemies of the truth, purveyors of relativism and permissiveness. Relativism, you hear that a lot in the news today. I have a definition there for you. It's the idea that you don't have a moral absolute, things that are absolutely right or absolutely wrong. Instead, the situation or your context determines whether or not something's considered moral in your culture. So your relativism would say, sex outside of marriage. God very clearly says he wants to reserve sexual relations for inside the marriage covenant. Society today, they've kind of said, culture's kind of said, sex outside of marriage, that's not that big of a deal. Just be safe, make sure it's consensual, right? That would be relativism. To say that, well, the culture, 200 years ago, that would not be what the culture would have said, right? The culture would say that today. God's word hasn't changed at all. Relativism says just go ahead and let your context or your culture determine what's morally right or morally wrong. So, purveyors of relativism, permissiveness. We don't reason with the other side. We only denounce. What do you think? Do you agree with that statement? You disagree with it? Scott?
Oh, I agree, and that's all. Now we have exposure to everything, even at a very young age via social media and everything, right? So that driving division is greater today than it ever been. So that especially, but you can take that all the way down to every level where that trying to divide. Division, 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 right?
So Dr. Keller in his book suggests for Christians that we should reassess our attitude about doubt. Especially when you're talking about your father's faith becoming yours and our ability to reach out to the skeptics that are around us. He said re-examine the idea of doubt. That maybe we as Christians should be more open to the doubts that we have in Christianity and asking questions about them. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to what right at the bottom there, number 5. He said, a faith without some doubts is like a human body without antibodies in it. Let's read some Bible passages first, and then we'll wrestle with what he said there. James 1. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. Matthew 14, from our reading from a couple weeks ago, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, Peter, why did you doubt? Mark 11. Truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and does not doubt in their heart, but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them. Hebrews. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see. What does the Bible have to say about doubt?
Don't do it.
Don't do it, okay? Yeah. Mark.
But then it's also there.
Okay, that's a really good point. Don't do it, but it's also there. I used to always say that doubt is the unfortunate companion of faith. That wherever there's faith, there's always doubts there too. So now, take what Scripture said and what Keller says here, that a faith without some doubts is like a human body without antibodies in it. What does he mean? What's his point?
You have no protection against it if you can't. It's like if you don't think it, you have no way to reason with it or take it out.
Excellent answer, Kate. Yeah, you have no protection without it is his point. If you haven't thought about it, then you have no defense against it. Yeah, and here's now this is one thing that I've seen a lot happen with young people who have their father's faith. They're brought up in the church every single Sunday, but they've never wrestled with personal doubts about faith in an environment where they could wrestle with them, find answers to them, and then when they get introduced to those doubts on a college campus, it's no surprise that when you go to college, your worldviews are changed all of a sudden. Your surroundings are completely different. You're no longer underneath your parents' house. You've got friends and acquaintances from cultures and societies you've never even been to or seen before. Your mind is being changed in the way you're being taught with some of these things where you're starting to understand the world in a way that you hadn't before. And then one of those fantastic professors introduces a doubt that maybe you've always had, but you've never had a chance to wrestle with. There's a lot of children whose faith has been really damaged on the public altar or the altar of the public academy. The answer is not to recreate monasteries and nunneries and make sure we send all of our kids there so they can be educated. The reality is to do what Kate is suggesting, and I think Dr. Keller is suggesting, is maybe we should have some more antibodies in our faith, in our kids' faith. Let's wrestle with some of these doubts. And his point that he makes is if we're willing to address the doubts that we have, like, can there really only be one true religion? Really? Just one. Every other religion is wrong except this one. If we're not willing to wrestle with that doubt until we have an answer, well, we're failing to have the antibodies to that doubt if it's introduced to us again. But if we do wrestle with that doubt or that question, think about two things it does. Number one, it gives us the antibodies that Kate was talking about. And number two, doesn't it make you feel a little bit more common ground with someone who might have a question that's similar? Right?
Let me go out on a limb.
Go.
You said that too quick. Like she was saying, and communicating with even a non-believer or whomever, and their skepticism, if you adopted some of their skepticism with the doubts, and a heavy dose of 2 Timothy 2:15 might level the playing field a little.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, if we can understand, if we can find common ground on some of these things that maybe we have questions about, and then we can have an opportunity to share with a skeptic the answer that God provides. Because here's the other thing that Dr. Keller makes the point of, and I think this is in page 3. Skeptics must also learn to look in belief B. All right, so if you're someone who's a skeptic, he's saying you cannot doubt belief A without faith. Are made to feel doubt belief A from a position of faith in belief B.
The Big Bang Theory.
Okay, and why prove that it happened, right? You can spend all day long talking about the results of it or looking at it, but it's an unprovable thing about what happened before the point of singularity or where the point of singularity came from. In fact, if you say, well, that's not a scientific question, it's a philosophical question, which is the Academy's way for saying a very common doubt that skeptical religion, right? That can't be true. But that's position A. The faith do they have to have in position B to say that? That there are multiple. That statement based purely on faith, right? So things that are not able to be proven have to be believed purely by faith. And so keep in mind that when someone says, when someone wants to make a Christianity sound like it's full of credulous people or people who have to just believe something without seeing it, that is absolutely true of the skeptic side too. Absolutely true. God doesn't exist. In order to believe that statement, I must have faith, in order to disprove my statement that says God exists, I must have absolute faith in statement B, which is that God doesn't exist. Can I prove that? Well, in no way. But I have to believe that on faith. That's what led to Pascal's wager, what was called way back when, where Pascal said, here's my wager. If I determine that I'm willing to bet either that there's a God or that there isn't a God. If I believe that there isn't a God, if I believe that there is a God, and it turns out I was wrong, what happens to me? No, synapses stop firing, you turn back into dirt, right? If I make the wager that there isn't a God, and I turn out to be wrong, what happens to me? Yeah, right? That was called Pascal's wager, right? And I've talked to people very specifically who were looking at that very sort of thing and said, well, that if each of these are based on pure belief that can't be proven, I want to explore the one that has a bit more of an upside, because this one doesn't. Right? Yeah, definitely. Please, Robert.
It's like, so basically you're saying every worldview is based on faith. So what's the basis of your faith? Our word is truth.
Yeah.
That's the antibody to the Bible.
Yeah.
They said, well, that's what you say. No, that's what God says. So if you don't agree with this, what's your Bible?
Exactly.
The comic book, the best-selling novel.
Well, and what people today will say is they'll say my basis for faith is modern science, modern sociology, and if this world is all we have, well, we should be kind to one another and do everything we can to make this world as good of a place as we can. Keep in mind, the folks that we're going to talk about today and the folks that we hope to reach in this age of skepticism are not the 1968, 1970 atheists who hate God, right? Remember, that number is not increasing, that number is decreasing. The skeptics we're trying to reach are these really friendly people who just want to make the world a better place, take care of their family, live reasonably productive lives. But here's the thing that they're missing. If you don't know it yet, you'll find out eventually. This life is full of crosses and trials and troubles. If this life is all we have, man, we should be pitied more than all men. We have an opportunity to tell these folks that no, there's something so much better. C.S. Lewis once said it like he said sometimes when you're trying to tell people about Christianity, it's like trying to take a little boy who's making mud pies and get him to leave to come with you to a vacation by the sea. Well, he's never been to the sea. He doesn't want to leave. He'd prefer to stay with the mud pies. Right? We have an opportunity to introduce people to what the vacation by the sea that's promised, and they don't have to content themselves with the little mud pies of this life. But again, it's not going to be people who are militantly atheists. It's going to be your friends, neighbors, maybe your relatives who think they know what Christianity is, but only know a caricature. And they're going to learn about what it is through you. Let's look at what Jesus does with our doubts. It's interesting. Number 5. Jesus said to Thomas, remember Thomas said, the disciples say, oh, we saw the risen Lord. And Thomas says, there's no way I'll ever believe that. Not unless I put my finger into the holes in his hands and shove my hand into his side where the spear opened it up. I'll never believe. Jesus says to Thomas, put your finger here. See my hands? Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. What's Jesus' attitude towards doubt? Two things here, right? What do you think, Joshua?
It disproves doubt with reality.
Disproves it with reality. And maybe one more thing. Miranda.
Forgiveness.
Yeah. I mean, he comes to Thomas in love here, right? Thomas said these words of disbelief. Does Jesus show up and said, you should never have doubted, get out? Now we're down to 10, right? 10's a nice round number. No, he shows up. Make sure Thomas is there because he wanted to give him answers to his doubts. He invites him back to a place of faith. So when we examine the doubts that we might have or the doubts that skeptics might have, maybe we should be like Jesus, ready to love, ready to forgive, ready to provide what Robert was saying, provide the answers that we have. Right? And then maybe for you and me, a really important thing to read too is Mark 9. This man comes to Jesus and asks him to heal his boy, and Jesus talks about his faith, and the man says, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. Right? He was expressing this fact that faith and doubt are so often going hand in hand. You know what Jesus does? He heals his boy. He heals his boy. Exactly. Back page. This is Dr. Keller. He says, I commend two processes to my readers. I urge skeptics to wrestle with the unexamined blind faith on which skepticism is based, and to see how hard it is to justify those beliefs to those who do not share them. I also urge believers to wrestle with their personal and culture's objections to the faith. At the end of each process, even if you remain a skeptic or believer that you've been, you will hold your own position with both greater clarity and greater humility. Then there will be an understanding, sympathy, and respect for the other side that did not exist before. Believers and non-believers will rise to the level of disagreement rather than simply denouncing one another. This happens when each side has learned to represent the other's argument in its strongest and most positive form. Only then is it safe and fair to disagree with it. That achieves civility in a pluralistic society, which is no small thing. So over the next few weeks, we're going to take a look at some of the big questions, some of the big doubts that both skeptics and believers have. So you can see the list there below. There can't just be one true religion. How could a good God allow suffering? Christianity is a straitjacket. The church is responsible for so much misjustice. How can a loving God send someone to hell? Science has disproved Christianity. And you can't take the Bible literally. So next week, if you happen to be reading along in the book, we're going to be doing the chapter on there can't be just one true religion. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Looks forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you.
Right on time. Look at it.
It's like I've done this before, you